Welcome to this Mastery Empowerment course from New Earth One Network. This is designed exclusively for your higher self connection and embodiment. Welcome. This is an introduction mastery empowerment course with Jean Ang of the Arcturian Healing Frequencies. And this is really meditation with frequencies for higher consciousness. And it truly is a gift to our planet as we assist everyone in raising consciousness at this time. Jean, thank you for being here. We have a beautiful series coming up. This is the Arcturian Time Intensive.
Yeah, looking forward to the next session. And as our previous sessions are always a beautiful time to kind of open what I call the energetic chalice to receive the divine energies, particularly coming in from the Arcturians for this particular series. And these are actually new frequencies that are going to be part of what's Arcturian Healing Method Level 10. That is a training that will be this December. And they all have to do with the concept of time and how our consciousness experiences time. So, and there's about 5 or 6 main frequencies that people can experience in this mastery empowerment class.
All right. And so level 10, we don't need to be participants in level 10, but this just shows you the depth of the work of people working with these frequencies that we can all experience here. Yes.
Yeah.
So let's go into it then. When you say opening the divine chalice, what happens first? We clear out the auric field or align or balance the other bodies?
Yeah, there's actually a particular method in the Arcturian classes that's called the Arcturian Healing Vortex. And many people who've been studying different healing or esoteric traditions might know about a book called The Medical Assistance Program of the Great White Brotherhood. It was written by Michaela Small Wright. And she presents a technique where you basically invite higher beings to hold the space. And it's very similar to people who have different spiritual practices where they do an invocation before the practice. And the Arcturian Healing Vortex is basically a pattern that's very similar to Michaela Small's Right, what she calls a coning, or what people would call an invocation. And by inviting these higher beings, they sort of hold the space, which would be like something that's being done for the mastery empowerment classes. And then they bring through the energies to people who are open to receiving those different frequencies or energies and information from other dimensions or from these different spiritual planes.
Yes, all right. And that's what goes on in these three sessions. So these three sessions, working with the time, it's a dimension of time. And it's really interesting. Does I know you're going to go over these, but when we're talking about the dimension of time, is that meaning that we can work around the dimension of time and I don't want to say manipulate it, but actually change things within the timeline?
Mhm. Yes. So I think the two ideas is that there's in when we experience the physical world is the both space aspect and then the time aspect. That sort of are the two big characteristics of our experience here. And for the most part, we experience time in a linear fashion, in a practical or normal way. So, like we would think of the past, present, and future. But just to give an example, when we think of the past, it is actually a thought that's occurring in the present about something like a memory we've had. And when we think of the future, it's actually a thought that we're having in the present, but about something that may be occurring. So in many respects, when you look at things more closely, there's actually only really one state of consciousness or one period, and that's the now period. We just tend to project onto, as a thought, what we label as the past or what we're labeling as the future. Just another aspect to kind of look at this fluidity, what I call fluidity of time, when you kind of go beyond just the basic surface level of our experiences. In many respects, when we experience things through our five senses, we're always experiencing things in the past. So even if someone touches you, just based on neuroscience, it takes a couple milliseconds for that touch to actually get transmitted to your brain, and then for you to register that. And I think people could understand that just kind of thinking about it. But a more clear example is when you go out and look at the stars, you're not actually looking at the stars as they are now, because even the sun is a couple days, or I'd have to look this up, a couple in terms of how fast the light can travel from the sun. So you're actually looking at the sun slightly in the past. And then if you had a star like Arcturus, it's actually 30 or so light years away. So when you look out and you see Arcturus, you're actually looking into the past 30 years ago. So that makes any sense. So this is kind of the aspects of the fluidity of time, just to start some examples.
Yes, all right. So as we gaze at the stars, then just to think about that passage of time and how, yes, being connected to it in the now moment, both the future and the past, projecting. And I know we've talked about that, the power of the now moment. All right. So as we get into these meditations, each of these sessions will focus on different areas. Let's go over it because you've got the first one, which is one of our favorites, the dream time frequency, the Arcturian time condenser frequency, and Arcturian time expansion frequency. How do we work with each of these, or how do each of these assist us?
Mhm. The Dreamtime frequency sort of allows us to exit this more linear or rigid perception of time. So you can think of our perception as heavily influencing how we experience time. So, for example, I think Einstein was the one who quoted, like, when you have your hand on a hot burner on the stove, even 1 second seems like a very long time. Whereas when you're with someone like your lover or someone who you are romantically in love with at that time, even 3 hours might seem like 1 second. So it's our perception actually influences a lot of time, and time is not as absolute as we think. So the Aboriginals had a term called dream time, or we kind of labeled what their experience. And this is a time that is probably in another state of consciousness that's outside of our kind of more rigid, linear space-time reality. And there probably was in an out-of-body state. They could perceive other levels of reality. So this frequency, and I believe the Arcturian consciousness, and particularly these different higher beings, if you would call them star beings or evolved beings, they may have come to a very strong realization of the fluidity of time, and may even have, like what we were mentioning, some aspect of controlling one's perception or experience of time. Just to give it as an example, many people who have contact experiences with so-called ETs or UFOs, one of the characteristics is they have displacement of time, like the time experience linearly is very different. Like they may have felt like they were somewhere at 3 p.m. and then all of a sudden the last memory they have is like the next day at like noon. So there was this loss of time. So there may be a type of vortex or energy field that these beings can create that alters our state of time perception. But anyways, this Arcturian dream time frequency is one way to have that come through so that we can exit this linear aspect of time and perhaps receive higher information that when we come back to our normal experience of this space-time reality can inform us and help us and even balance our different subtle bodies.
Yeah, all right, that's very cool. And so we love to pay attention to the dream space in these sessions because they do shift and change, and that's information for us. So, okay, a little vortex there that we can put our intentions to work with the Arcturians or other star beings or our galactic family.
Yes, yes. And then the other two frequencies for that first session is the Arcturian time condenser frequency and then the Arcturian time expansion frequency. And they're basically complements of each other. And it's very similar to the quote that I had from Einstein, but the aspect is you can change your perception of time or reality of time so that it condenses experiences. So you may, for example, in this COVID period, maybe a lot of experiences people had. So in the last year, they may have felt like they experienced, or we may say this in another period of our life, like the last year felt like, a couple lifetimes. Like I experienced so many things or learned so many things that it felt like a couple lifetimes. Colloquially, we may say that, or we may, in the opposite way, say, the last month it just flew by, like it as if the time flow had expanded, and we went through it faster, so it didn't seem as dense or condensed. So these two frequencies allow us to sort of have those experiences, and the reason that's helpful in health is a lot of times when we're experiencing an illness or a challenge, we may have a certain experience or learning experiences occurring. And so if we can shift these two realities of time, we become more fluid in our experience of time and therefore more fluid in how something might express itself in this sort of physical reality. So that's the purpose of those two frequencies.
Very good. And so in the sessions, we spend time in group meditation receiving these frequencies. And it's very interesting because for those who are familiar with bending time, like traveling or driving along in a rush to get somewhere, it was actually, if can you talk a little bit about this? There's been stories of people being able to, even though they may be a little bit rushed, if they shift their frequency or perception, they can actually get there sooner than later. Have you heard of those instances?
Yes, yes, that might be like a fun experiment people can have before now, if when they're viewing this, and if they participate or just into the future. Is the technique that I've heard is that if you are like in a rush, then what you do is just open your consciousness to the fact that you could arrive on time or even earlier, and then you don't look at your digital clock. You don't look at any clocks is one of the key aspects, because it seems like this would be another kind of thought experiment. But the clock is actually an artificial label on how we're experiencing reality. It's a way so that we can both kind of do things practically, like we can meet here at a certain time. But there's nothing actually absolute about 9 a.m. It's a label that we've put. Anyways, what that does in my own experience is when you look at the clock, because our perception is so strong, like our mind influences reality so powerfully. And I think that's one thing, well, maybe as word learning more and presenting more, more people are presenting, very helpful information. But it kind of didn't come with our user manual that we actually, our consciousness influences our reality so strongly, is that whenever you look at the clock, you freeze your experience of time. And I've noticed that in my own classes. That's why I'll take all the clocks down when I'm teaching, particularly like an energetic class, because every time someone looks at the clock, because there's a group conscience there, they're freezing the time space in that group field, particularly myself. So if you keep that no clocks in the room, then the experience in that energetic field is much more fluid. And people feel like time, like either, usually they feel like the classes go by really quickly. like they, but back to our practical example. So that would be the technique you could experiment if you need to get somewhere sooner than you had thought. Just to open yourself up to that reality, and then don't look at the clock.
Don't look at the clock. That's why some no longer wear watches, right? We're free of the time. Wow. Okay. Very good. And it also brings to mind when we do look at the clock and we see those numbers like 11:11 or 11:22 or
Mhm.
12:12, etc., right? That
Mhm.
actually, what would you say? Is it elevating us out of the normal consciousness?
Yes, yes. I think that there's another aspect also there that spiritual beings can work through electronics or the physical world in both very strong and subtle ways. But they may be in one, maybe simple explanation or possible explanation is spiritual consciousness is aware of what's going on here in the physical world, much like they have this EVP phenomena, like electronic voice phenomena, and orb photos, where they're kind of influencing digital, cameras. But here, they may direct your consciousness to the clock at the appropriate time, where there's some significant number sequence, and that might be part of also your own super consciousness, and therefore you get this kind of message or significance to what's happening at that moment.
You've explained that so well, that there's beings that are working there with
Mhm.
us. And so pay attention, pay attention. Well, that's just in the first session. And then we have a day or a night to integrate before the second session. And this one, again, is working with time and consciousness, Arcturian time collapsing frequency, and Arcturian timelessness frequency.
Mhm. Yes, the time collapsing frequency can be very helpful for illnesses, health challenges, our goals, and also just in general if one's involved interested in their own spiritual evolution or consciousness evolution. The basic idea is with the help of our higher self and the Arcturians and other people's guides. The idea is that our soul is sort of learning or processing certain experiences. You could call them learning lessons. And each time we're making a decision regarding that, or our sort of realization of that lesson, we make a decision. If we, to make it kind of practical, if we're not quite getting the lesson, then we kind of get more opportunities in this space-time reality. Maybe you say this internet or this interconnected net of our higher self and other beings, as well as people and experiences. There's like another almost like video that you get to watch to experience again, and perhaps learn from that. So that would actually make time longer if you're not quite getting the lesson. So you kind of have to keep having more videos, experiences. But if you can capture the lesson earlier, then you don't necessarily have to go through those future videos. You don't have to watch or go experience those future kind of experiences. I'm kind of metaphorically the videos, which I can kind of go over this metaphor of time, which I didn't quite say. So you collapse time, and usually a lot of that has to do with unconditional, making the choice for unconditional love or forgiveness, and that collapses time. So you don't have to kind of keep going through experiences to learn that lesson.
Well, that just bears repeating, because if that's all that's needed to do is really make a choice of love or forgiveness, and it collapses time, that's evolution. And that really spells out our whole journey here on Earth. It really is a return to love in all ways.
Yes, yes, exactly. And the possibilities, of course, is that although we experience time linearly, we could be collapsing even lifetimes, with just one decision of love or forgiveness. In a sense, we may not have to, if people were to think of this uh, in some possibilities, like you may not have to reincarnate again and have that opportunity again to forgive if you could do that, like maybe like within this time frame.
All right, I have to share something very interesting that corroborates what you say in this teaching. There was a gentleman, Jim Bruton, who had a near death experience. And in his in between space, he was with his higher self or God, this greater being, who showed him a place. It was like an egg. He described it as an egg, and he could see this webbing in it. And within this, he saw all the choices, and
Mm,
he saw timelines in the future and things just passing him. And he saw, and he didn't have to be aware of actually the darker or the negative side of those choices. He just knew that that was a point for a choice or a different choice. So isn't that amazing that it's like collapsing lifetimes with these choices? And so he came back and his whole life changed. He got a
wow.
divorce, right, which is a high incident rate because of this profound shift within
Mm,
him. It was like he was a different person.
wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Uh-huh.
did you want to share on the metaphor of time?
Oh, right, right. Yeah, I learned there's many different metaphors I think and that are helpful here in understanding these frequencies. They kind of, I think, informed me in terms of interacting with the Arcturians, with what would be possible to facilitate the fluidity, what I call the fluidity of time. But one of them comes from the metaphysics of A Course in Miracles. I'm sure there's other spiritual traditions that present this, but it's kind of difficult to understand that by reading that book, which is already quite large, but it's it's a very beautiful book just to read, even like a couple lines of that book. But the idea there is that actually everything has occurred already, like we're already actually back in unity with source, at at a certain level. So you could call that like level one. So this is a metaphysical concept rather than how we may be experiencing life, so to say. But maybe in these altered states, like what you just shared with this man, I forgot his name, but we can actually perceive it more directly, these different metaphysical ideas. But anyways, the idea is that everything has occurred. So metaphorically, like all the videos of time that we would be experiencing, they've all been recorded, all the way back to returning the source. And then on level two is that we're actually now experiencing all those videos as if it's like happening in the future. Like I'm talking to you, and yesterday we planned this meeting, and now this is the present. But yesterday this was like a future event. But actually, all these experiences have occurred. But the possibility is you can make different choices in this level two reality, and if you choose like things where it's not so much like about love or unity, then you have to keep experiencing all these different videos, and maybe some of them we'd label as nightmares or not such pleasant experiences. And so the guidance is to follow our higher self, or in the Course's language, they call it the Holy Spirit, but it's sort of like a higher aspect of yourself, a more wise aspect of yourself, where you're choosing love or forgiveness, and you basically are choosing the happy videos, like the pleasant videos or the kind videos, but you're also collapsing all the videos that you need to experience to get back to the one. So if you keep choosing unforgiveness or unlove, you actually have to keep experiencing more of those videos. So time actually, you have this experience of having a longer experience of time, and that could be not just one lifetime, but like we were talking, perhaps many lifetimes. But if you make I don't know if it's the right choice or the choice from your higher self or the Holy Spirit or divine guidance, you collapse the need to experience a lot of those videos, particularly the unpleasant videos. But in level one metaphysics, everything's already recorded. So in some ways, you could rest in the fact, if you feel this is a practical philosophy, that it's all done. We're all back with source.
Yes, and what's interesting there is that when and it would be very interesting for our participants to share stories about this, but when we make a shift towards love or a different decision, in my own life with a relative recently, I did that. I heard an inner voice, my higher self, and these sessions really enhance that connection as well. It's really a frequency that we're able to achieve that. But I heard this voice to reach out to this person, and I did, and it was from a different place. It was from no judgment of the past or anything. And something happened very quickly, and it was life changing. So those are the instances of it. And the fact that we're also collapsing all the old things so we don't need to experience it anymore. That's a really good thing. That shows us how we can truly steer our experience all in the name of love. And what a beautiful journey on earth as we learn this duality and these choices. Wow. It's really like watch that movie Groundhog Day, because that really says all of the path of this choice of love. If we just shift it that way, everything changes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Uh, Yeah, there
Did you want
must
to add
have.
anything on that?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that the director must have maybe had read some of this metaphysical concepts, or the writer of that book, of that movie Groundhog Day. Uh, yeah, I was just going to add, right, yeah. So when we choose kind of find our higher self, or what the course is called the Holy Spirit, or even just we may have guides who are more awakened or enlightened, then whatever that source is of our divine, we experience more what they call the happy dreams that are like joyous. And then at some point we do, in that metaphysics, exit or come to the realization of the back to the oneness of source, or oneness of all, or oneness with all beings, or God, or source, however people might conceive of that. uh, yeah, but the just to mention, the other frequency there is called the Arcturian timelessness frequency, and that is a more direct experience that maybe people have had, where they're completely out of time, and it's probably a more accurate perception of reality. So what I was saying is, like, when we experience reality through our five senses, let's say we back to experiencing the actual star, Arcturus, or you could choose any star that's maybe a couple light years away. We're actually, it makes sense. Like, oh yeah, even though I'm experiencing that light right now, it's actually the star that was 30 years ago for Arcturus, or 30, I think it's 31 or 37 years light years away. But actually, you could also experience the now of that star. It's not through your five physical senses, though. You're because that would be a past experience. It would be like a more a mind to mind connection, or sort of a consciousness connection directly. And I do believe that we're at another level of reality, but I do believe when we have these ESP events or telepathic events, we're actually co-experiencing everyone or all of reality in the now. And then it takes some time for that experience to come through our brain, and then say, like, oh yeah, I had the same thought you had, or like when you have a telepathic experience. But that transmission actually occurred in the now, if that makes sense. So, anyways, the timelessness frequency, hopefully that was somewhat understandable, helps with the assistance of the our higher self or the Arcturian consciousness to exit this temporal linear space-time experience and go to that full now experience. And there we can receive again different information or more directly experience this information, like what happens in telepathy or unity consciousness.
Yes, very good. All right. Um, that's really interesting to focus on unity consciousness in that way. I think that's a really valuable tool and a valuable practice in this time right now. So, very, very good. And I think that as we move forward, we can start to experiment as well with telepathy as we learn more about this. That's another experiment that we can try with each other. I know some have already reported it. You know, you think about your friend and you kind of reach in and tap in and then just play it that way. Isn't that interesting? That will be our skills coming online.
Mhm. Yes, and just a note about that. I think the way our technology is going, it is in some ways going to facilitate telepathic or at least more mind-to-mind kind of communication, because we're getting closer. Like because let's say texting, let's say compare it to now versus 100 years ago. Texting allows us to receive messages from anyone around the world fairly quickly. And sometimes we'll have the experience of the transmission of that idea in this unity consciousness, which is still slow because it occurs at the unity consciousness level, and then it may take a couple milliseconds or seconds, it depends on, to actually hit our brain consciousness, if that makes sense. But anyways, then we get the confirmation through a text, like someone will send us a text and then you can confirm that, whereas 100 years ago you couldn't get that confirmation, or even 20 years ago. So and then that makes you realize, oh yeah, we're really connected. It kind of confirms. So I think it will, like you said, accelerate. I'm just mentioning technology. I think actually could help us come to that realization faster and faster on a global level.
Yes, absolutely. Plus the tuning into someone when you see the dot, dot, dot reply, right? I mean, that's really like, wow. And yeah, I get what you're saying there. Fascinating as we move in harmony with this technology. And I like the way that you say that, moving in this harmony. So that is very interesting. And that's just session 2 in this meditation with these frequencies. It really is amplified by the group energy. I just want to share that. And then session 3 is the Arcturian and Archi, creating cycles of time frequency, and the Arcturian water frequencies. Water is multidimensional.
Mhm.
Cool. Share more.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention that it'll probably come in energetically, but when I usually journey shamanically, I mean, it's just a way of like, it's like hypnosis, but altering my consciousness to receive these informations for the different levels and also for the mastery empowerment classes from the Arcturian consciousness. But there's something that I was seeing on that journey that I just label like an Arcturian time tower, and what I think it is like an energetic construct that comes in from the Arcturians. It's a bit like when you go to certain power spots on the planet, time seems to alter, like because of the energetic vortex. Like you enter, like all these things we've been, like I've kind of been labeling as frequencies, but enter timelessness. Like I know when I was in Joshua Tree, doing a training with Stephen Greer, actually, you didn't know what day it was anymore. Like, we know when Monday is, and Tuesday has a certain feeling, and Wednesday has a certain feeling, and Saturdays have a certain feeling. I think that's because of collective consciousness. But on this retreat, you didn't know, particularly because you're also in the desert. And I think there's an energetic vortex that allows for that. Anyways, if people kind of get that idea, the Arcturians can bring that in to a place, into like a space, and it's called, the way I saw it on the journey is called this, and then labeled it as an Arcturian time tower. So anyways, I think that will come in during the session or whenever these frequencies are being run, and all kind of shifts in time. This what we've been describing are ways to maybe try to intellectually understand it, but this alteration just in our perception of reality starts to occur. It's almost like bending the time or making, I call it making it fluid. But anyways, kind of back to the level, the third session. The Archai are actually angelic beings that are known within like a certain framework, and that's called the spiritual hierarchy, which we may have talked about in other classes, which I can briefly mention here, just so people may have heard of these different angelic beings. But they actually create time. That's their kind of function. So the spiritual hierarchy are the angels, the archangels, the Archai, which are the spirits of time, the Elohim, which if you study sacred geometry, they're spirits of form, and then the dynamis, the caryatides, the thrones, and the cherubim. So it's kind of like in evolution, it's going upwards the way I just mentioned it. So, anyways, because we're working so much with time, and since we're asking the assistants or invoking also for the archive beings, um, and in particular, they can also create cycles of time. So there's in esoteric traditions, or we've maybe people are familiar with the 2012. There was a ending of a 24,000 cycle or calendar. But there's even smaller cycles that different traditions have talked about, like a 33 cycle. There's even a 666 cycle, and an 888 cycle. But the essence of that frequency is that we're asking the Arcturians and the Archai to actually create beneficial cycles within our own lives. So, like, you could have a healing cycle occur for your health challenge like every 3 days or every 7 days. It's almost like a healing frequency or a healing period comes back through. And we're sort of, I don't know if artificially creating it or creating it with the help of these beings. So that's the essence of that. It's very creative, but that's the essence of what that frequency helps to do, also on a practical level.
So you can create these beneficial cycles in all areas of your life. And
Hmm.
that's a universal law as well, the law of the cycle.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
so allowing is a key part in going with the cycle, right?
Yeah, exactly. The best compliment to that people might understand, particularly people who are therapists or just if you've studied like certain trauma literature, is let's say this is kind of the compliment, but we're kind of doing the opposite. But let's say someone had a very traumatic event when they was like 6 years old, and it was on like it was in March, and then for whatever reason somehow they forgot it or they're not paying attention to it. They're like 30, but some for whatever reason like around that same date, like March, they feel depressed. So like the cycle's coming back, even if they consciously aren't aware of it. It's like embedded somewhere in their subtle body and consciousness. And this has been reported a lot. Like, and then they realize, oh, this was actually the date of when that traumatic event occurred. So that's a cycle too. So we're kind of creating a positive cycle, but that just to give people an idea of the structure of that.
Good. So we'll get creative when we work with these frequencies and put our intentions for what beneficial cycles we want to create in our life with everything, relationships, health, um, uh, prosperity, abundance, all of this. Okay. And so the next frequency is the Arcturian water frequency.
Yes, yes. I thought about including this overall in this kind of what time intensive, even though directly it's sort of like an element rather than time related. Partly because it's coming down in the training in the level 10, all as a package. But time, in some ways, the main thrust of all these different frequencies is to make our experience of time fluid, which is exactly what water is about. Water is fluidity, like less structured. And we, like back to that linear experience of time, uh, in some ways, we are taught to experience in a three-dimensional way time as past, present, and future. And all these frequencies are just shaking that up. allowing us to kind of be more creative with time. And so water would be kind of a nice, there are very specific things we'll do with this water frequency, but overall as a general theme, it kind of fits in making our consciousness more fluid around time, also around space. And people who are listening to this may have also experienced the quantum spoon bending class, which I know we offered as a video. Maybe that's our first offering together. But that's what we're doing here with time is what we did with space in quantum spoon bending, because what quantum spoon bending did is we tend to experience space as very like objects in space as very rigid, like the metal of the fork. We don't tend to think it could bend, particularly if it's very solid. But then through energy and intention, it becomes soft, and fluid, like we can bend it and shape it. And the same thing with time. We tend to experiencing it very linearly, but there are times where we get out of that, and so it's kind of, this is the version. This is like quantum spoon bending for time. This next mastery empowerment class.
Great. And that frequency of water, as we know, it follows the path of least resistance. And there's an ease and a grace there with that. And with the timelessness, this is why we share that it's so important for people to do what they love and follow their passion, because that joy and that passion puts us into a space of timelessness where we look up and, like in your workshops, people are enjoying the energy. And on sacred site trips that you've taken, that we've all taken, when we step outside of watching the clock or having to have those commitments of time, magic really does happen. Experiences open up that you wouldn't have if there was that looking at the time. So very interesting.
Yes, yes. Another topic that I've been very interested in that you're kind of are referring to is the flow, like flow research, like being in the flow, and kind of why people, like you said, when they're enjoying something and being slightly challenged in a skill, but not overly challenged, that's when we're best in the flow. And one of the characteristics of being in the flow experience is uh, like timelessness, like time is no longer a factor, or time goes by very quickly. At least some time alteration is always a characteristics of a flow experience.
Very good. Well, Jean, this is a beautiful session that we have in store for everyone. And it's good people can join us live for these 3 sessions. And of course, we always get the recordings out. We always extract the energy sessions into their own MP3s. And we find that there's people who come and join in the group energy field just simply from the recordings. That is our quantum timelessness, as we create these tools to assist the raising of consciousness with the help of the Arcturians. So, would you like to share a quick little taste of one of these frequencies?
Yes, I think we'll do the Arcturian time cycle uh, frequency, and just here, just realize that it can be done in with two intentions. One is if you'd like to create a mini cycle of positive time cycle in your life, like for example, when before we channel a frequency, you could set a time cycle. So it could be like 3 days. It could even be on the hour, but maybe we'll keep it to days, like every 3 days or every, let's say, a week, every 7 days. This like beneficial healing energy will kind of come through again for you. And the other thing, and I would only choose one of these intentions for now, and of course you could re-listen to this recording for this portion, is if you had a traumatic time cycle, this frequency will also dissolve it. So like back to because many people might have identified with that, like they do remember every March I remember this traumatic experience I've had when it was on March, and so this could help to dissolve that. So so we're going to experience the Arcturian and Archi creating cycles of time frequency. And before we start, you can set your intention for the length of the time cycle and the intention for the frequency. the time cycle. Also, if you wanted to dissolve a traumatic time cycle, you can simply state that also. So we're starting the Arcturian and Archi, creating time cycle frequency. Continuing to deepen the Arcturian and Archi creating time cycles frequency. And entering a final and third deepening phase of the Arcturian and Archi creating time cycle frequency. That completes the exposure to the frequency. When you feel comfortable, you can open your eyes, snap your fingers.
And that was a beautiful experience of what we go very deeply into in each session with Jean Ang and these Arcturian healing frequencies. Thank you so much for that, Jean. Anything else you'd like to share about this series?
Yeah, actually, when we were channeling that, a thought came that maybe to share. If people get interested in this, they have identified, actually, Rudolf Steiner is where I learned this from. We have a time body, like there's a subtle structure in our subtle bodies that records or creates cycles of time, and it's in our etheric body. So they call it the time body, and that's why if people have studied some of anthroposophy, which was kind of the school of Rudolf Steiner or his intellectual framework, or have gone to schools that were based on Rudolf Steiner, like nursery schools or educational schools. If we tend to do things at the same time every day, our etheric body learns that, and it's very beneficial for our etheric body. It doesn't have to keep expending energy to like take into these new accounts of the schedule. So if you always eat like breakfast at the same time, if you always meditate at the same time, you create this like a momentum in this time body cycle. And then it becomes easier. It's almost like a habit, but it's an actual an etheric body structure. Uh, yeah, I just wanted to mention that if people kind of wanted to delve into this idea of cycles of time.
Okay, good. Thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting because you said the cycle of like 1 day or 3 day. I know some might want to say, can I do this for every day or every 3 days? What do you recommend for the time? Like some might say, I want to do this every hour.
Oh, right, right. Yeah, I think people can tune in to what they think. Usually these cycles, there's power if the cycle is longer, because more gets integrated. And then there's more practicality if one's in an acute illness, like it might not make sense to make a cycle like 3 years, like every 3 years something comes through again, like some so you may be doing like a smaller cycle of like a couple days, or like you said, even a couple hours. Maybe like a 6 hour cycle could be like on the lowest limit. Because you do want some time before, let's say, these healing energies or this pattern returns to integrate what occurs. So there's kind of like a
Okay.
rest period there. Uh-huh.
Yes, that important integration period. All right, very good. Well, we will go into all of these frequencies in our 3 sessions, and they will again be recorded. So you do not need to be live, but we do wish that people join us live. We look forward to those joining us live as well. And I want to mention that your quantum spoon bending is in option 3 on this webpage. So that is a great way for people to work with you more closely and access your library of teachings and webinars. Thank you so much, Jean, for this Mastery Empowerment course.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, everyone. It's great to meet everyone here.